So it's going to be read a little differently, a little bit more like, a little bit more theatrical, to say the least. So if you could actually give a round of applause for the band who will be helping me with this reading. It's a big task for them to have to do. So I just invite you to listen, to be curious, and to just receive this. So on the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bista, Harbona, Bigtha, and Agatha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty. For she was fair to behold, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him.
Not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in the province of King Ahasuerus. It pleases the king. Let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus, and let her king give royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike.
May a beautiful young virgin be sought out for the king, and let the girl who pleases the king, the queen, instead of Vashti.
This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish of Benjaminites. Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was fair and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in the citadel of Susa in custody of Hegai, Esther was also taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetic treatments and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, and advanced her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people of kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gates bowed down and did obeisance to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance.
Why did you disobey the king's command?
When they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see what Mordecai's words would avail. For he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, Haman was infuriated. But he thought it beneath him to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So having been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate cloth and with sackcloth. When Esther's maids and her eunuch came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend to her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. So Hathach goes to Mordecai.
Mordecai didn't bow. Haman was really upset and decided to take vengeance on all the Jews. Seriously, here is the written decree and the amount he promised of all the Jews.
And Esther sends a message back to Mordecai through Hathach.
All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come into the king for 30 days.
And Mordecai returns a message back to Hathach to Esther.
Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence in such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. But you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this.
And Esther sends a message back to Hathach to Mordecai.
Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish.
Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, opposite to the king's hall. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. And he held out the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter.
What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom.
If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king.
Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther desires.
So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared.
What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled.
This is my petition and request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I will do as the king has said.
So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. On the 2nd day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther,
What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled.
If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my petition. And the lives of my people. That is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had solely been merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king.
Who is he? And where is he? Who has presumed to do this?
A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman.
Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king rose from the feast in wrath and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that the king had determined to destroy him. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, Look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high.
Hang him on that.
So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then the anger of the king abated. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. Then the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and given to Mordecai. So Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet, weeping and pleading with him to avert the evil design of Haman the Agagite and the plot he had devised against the Jews. The king held out the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther rose and stood before the king.
If it pleases the king, and if I have won his favor, and if the thing seems to be right before the king, and I have his approval, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, son of Hammedatha and Agagite, which he wrote giving orders to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming on my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?
See, Esther, the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he plotted to lay hands on the Jews. You may write as you please with regard to the Jews, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked.
Word of the Lord. Good thing that wasn't the gospel. You had to stand through all of that. Hello. Do not recommend it. Just kidding. Thank you again to my readers. It's a little hot, so excuse me. But good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
So this past Wednesday was Juneteenth, and for those who are not familiar, Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom for formerly enslaved Africans. The official date is June 19, 1865, although the Emancipation Proclamation was written and signed in 1863. The thing is, in Louisiana and Texas, no one told my enslaved ancestors that slavery was abolished. So imagine being brutalized, raped, and tortured for an additional 2 years after the country declared this was actually illegal. So, for specifically African Americans, although all folks of African descent are invited to celebrate, this is an interesting day of both and. We are both liberated from great oppression and still in the fight for our dignity and liberation in other areas. Education inequality, police brutality, real estate segregation and redlining, income inequality, the school-to-prison pipeline, the unjust trials and court sentencing, mass incarceration and the incarceration of Black people for nonviolent drug offenses in states that have legalized said drugs and allowed for white people to become millionaires in that industry. But we aren't enslaved anymore, right? So racism's over and someone falsely declared that this is a post-racial society. But if there is one thing that I've learned from the elders of Black liberation theology, it's that our liberation is bound to the liberation of others. Meaning, I'm not free until my neighbors too are free. Meaning, I will never have true liberation if liberation is not accessible to all people. And that's where we find ourselves in the reading today. Our passage today comes from the Book of Esther, quoted from the book, but also reimagined in a way that we can see this story play out in a more realistic way. We have a chauvinistic king who prefers his queen to be obedient and walked around like a trophy wife. There are advisors who encourage the king's bad habits, one in particular who cannot control his own pride and rage. We see a young girl from a marginalized community fall into a place of privilege by being of an oppressor-passing aesthetic, and a marginalized elder displaced in an empire after the displacement of his whole people, whom the weight of his entire community is now on his shoulders because of said prideful, enraged advisor declaring his entire people a threat instead of reprimanding just him. It's chaos. It's uncomfortable. It's theatrical even, right? They're like, hang him on that. I mean, that's excellent, literature. But it's also so real. Esther, our soon-to-be queen, has managed to hide her Hebrew identity and conform to the mainstream Persian society. And Mordecai, her cousin, and the man that raised her, challenges her with the task to save her already exiled and displaced people from being caged and put to death. We see the contemplation that Esther faces. I don't even know if the king likes me, but I too could be put to death. It's too soon, are you sure? The discomfort, the fear, estimating what's truly at stake. Esther's the 1% now, right? She's part of this people with power. Esther's safe. Is it worth potentially sacrificing her own life for an entire group of people? Well, maybe. Maybe no one told her that even in her place of power, if a king can call for genocide at any point, that she will actually never be safe. That Queen Vashti too was in the same place, but the moment she disappointed the king, she was kicked out. Maybe if the lack of foresight, and no one could have explained that her liberation is bound to the liberation of all peoples. For example, like in the year 2015, while the Supreme Court legalized marriage equality, they also removed a chunk of voters' rights acts that allowed for states to introduce dozens of voter discrimination laws. Or that during the time of World War II, that Japanese and Japanese Americans would have land ownership rights slowly removed from them and then forced into internment camps, though it was their communities being terrorized by white vigilantes. Maybe Esther and her folks, like her, may not have been aware that in 2017, while flights from the Middle East were literally in the air, the government could unethically discriminate residential visas, green cards, and temporary visas from over 11 different countries and direct people off planes into holding cells for days at a time. Or that children could be ripped out of the arms of their parents, sold to adoptive parents, and not be forced to be returned to them after they were freed from concentration camps or deported. We call that kidnapping, to be more specific. When we do not hold our leaders accountable for injustice to some, injustice can then happen to any. And that is what we're seeing here in the story of Esther. We're seeing what it looks like to be challenged with the reality that at any point, your loved ones, your neighbors, or even you can be forced into a place of oppression. Yes, we're reading a story from a monarch. But what happens when even in democratic elected positions, we give one leader autonomous, unchecked power? Last Thursday, a thread came across my Twitter timeline. For those who may not have Twitter, it's a form of social media. It's very interesting for interesting discussions and also for the news across the world. And this thread took the breath out of my lungs as I mumbled it to myself sitting in my car. So I'm going to read it for all of you. And you can take with it as you choose. But there also were photos here that I can't present. If you care about what's happening at the border, you need to read and share this thread. I've just gotten off the phone with a friend who is a legal volunteer in Border Patrol facilities. Don't look away. My friend has done 2 tours now volunteering as a legal advocate inside CBP facilities. She passed along information about what is happening there that indicates that this administration is violating every basic human right and is moving towards military solutions. So that folks understand the process, CBP has outposts on the border. Refugees seeking asylum travel hundreds of miles on foot, including with infants and small children, and turn themselves in at these outposts on foot. Here's what happened next. Don't look away. CBP then transfers these human beings to a facility called the Dog Pound. Here, my friend started crying. The Dog Pound is comprised of cages outside on the dirt with no protection from the elements. Don't look away. There are dozens of teen moms here. There's no baby food. While there, my friend saw CBP agents take a baby from her teenage mother, strip the baby of its clothes, hand the baby back to the mother, and send them outside to the dog pound to sleep in the dirt. The dog pound has no running water, no covers, no tarps, no care, no safety from the elements. It is freezing at night and deathly hot during the day. Everyone is sick. My friend said she saw a baby on this trip that was so sick, I thought it would be dead by the morning. Toddlers in the dog pound who have been eating solid foods are only given infant formula. Moms are trying to start breastfeeding again so their children don't starve. These moms are dehydrated, sick, and have walked miles through the desert with no water. CBP gives them nothing. It gets worse. Don't look away. From the dog pound, these human beings are moved to an area called the freezer. The freezer is kept at 55 degrees. Some of the refugees who are moved there are still wet from their journey and are put in the freezer wet. CBP is keeping human beings in freezers for weeks at a time, including critically ill, disabled people, sick children, teenage mothers with babies. The floor of the freezer is made of dirt or very rough concrete. There are no beds. Keep reading. From the freezer, refugees are supposed to be moved to ICE facilities that are designed for residential care. They have beds, foods, bathrooms. However, keep reading. Those facilities are empty. ICE is shutting them down. Don't look away. What our government is doing instead is moving refugees to military installations. The announcement about Fort Sill, which was used as a Japanese internment camp, is only the start. Why would our government be doing this? Well, here's why. These concentration camps, let's call them what they are, will be under the control of the Department of Homeland Security, but within the Department of Defense. So unlike ICE facilities, which allow site inspectors inside, there will be no inspection of military-run camps. The military will be able to deny access to anyone who chooses. No media, no oversight. Lawyers will not be allowed in. Human rights monitors will not be allowed in. The camps will also be protected airspace, meaning no drones can fly over to take pictures of what's going on inside. This administration will be able to conduct whatever way it wants without anyone knowing what's going on inside. Think about what that means. Think about why they would want that. And this is happening right now. ICE facilities with beds and foods are empty because the administration is moving refugees into military concentration camps where they can do anything they choose without oversight, media scrutiny, or advocate access. This administration is already committing atrocities at CBC facilities. Border Patrol agents at the facility where my friend was working to refers to these human beings as bodies, not people, bodies. They're denying medicine, toilets, beds, food, shelter, and clothes. My friend said that Flores is on very tenuous ground. We're days away from being met with, we're not going to let you in no matter what. What is coming is crimes against humanity. America is already perpetuating mass human rights violations, and this administration is setting it up so they can do far worse in secret under military supervision. Military forces are already being shipped to CBP. My friend saw Coast Guard agents, read that again, Coast Guard agents working for CBP at this facility. If we do nothing, there will be blood on our hands. This is where we are. This is who we are. Look reality in the face. Don't look away. Fight like human life depends on it. It does. It does. It does. I moved from one Mexican neighborhood to another this past month. And in my own ignorance, though I knew these things were happening, it never felt as threatening because I don't see ICE raids or hear my neighbors talking about their homes being raided or being taken from their jobs. The reality is real, but it didn't always feel so real because the safety felt in my very Mexican communities. Then this comes up. And I'm reminded all over again that almost everyone I've met, of course, has an auntie or cousin in Texas. I'm reminded that one of my young adults is from California and is one of two of her cousins that can safely cross the border in her family. It triggers the chiste I received a month ago when a friend of mine, Dula, actually shared that after a trip visiting her family back in Mexico, that only she and not her mother was able to return to Chicago. And obviously, these are not the folks only from Mexico, but people that are from Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Places where I've gone to visit and see how US imperialism and mass incarceration has damaged their homes. This is a sin that my country and I carry. The sin of detaining asylum seekers and being quiet about their abusers. We carry the sin of neutrality, which Bishop Desmond Tutu tells us is taking the side of the oppressor. The sin I speak of is the blood on each and every one of our hands when we justify the death of children and adults, kidnapping, human trafficking, and torturing of people every time we question their document status. A sin that we can all repent on by acting boldly in the Spirit. To bring us back to the text today, Queen Esther did what was righteous. She used her voice, her power, and privilege to speak truth to power. Let's have a banquet and discuss the unjust executions you have planned for an entire body of people. She gives a face to the people by revealing her own status and seeks empathy from the king. Do you love me? Do you even like me? Do you think it's fair and just to then dispose of my people like scraps? We take a whole week to honor the unjust execution, burial, and repentant resurrection of our Savior Jesus Christ. So that's why we're going to talk about this today. To study the way an oppressive state again tries to silence a people and celebrate how God uses her power to resurrect the voice of liberation that overcomes all evil. So I think it's fair to take this sermon and to discuss our present oppressive states trying to silence the people and how we as God's people are called to resurrect that same voice of liberation to overcome this evil. It's important for us to see ourselves in the gospel stories and be reminded that nothing is new under the sun. Let us be reminded that by definition found in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, that a concentration camp is a place where a large number of people, such as prisoners of war, political prisoners, refugees, or a member of an ethnic or religious minority, are detained or confined under armed guard. And this word also first appeared in 1897. If chattel slavery was permitted to happen for over 200 years, even after it was abolished, and if genocide of at least 60% of all indigenous people could happen for hundreds of years, then what will stop these ICE concentration camps from being another one of our 100+ year atrocious sins? If my liberation is bound to the liberation of my neighbor, how can we call ourselves free if our siblings right now are in a cage? So who shall we be today? Are we walking boldly into fear and discomfort like Queen Esther with our power and access at stake? Are we following in the belief of Haman to execute a people because of individual situations? Shall we be the oppressive state that unjustly executes and neglects the innocents, the lame, the displaced, asylum seekers and refugees? Or will we be the people of God, who God has called us to be? Amen.